My name is Marion, and I am 67 years old. For 4 decades, I tirelessly worked our family dairy farm alongside my beloved husband Arthur, building it from a modest operation into a thriving $3 million enterprise. I poured my physical labor, my financial resources, and my emotional investment into every acre of that land, envisioning it as my children's rightful inheritance, a living family legacy that would honor their father's memory and provide security for generations to come. I believe completely in their love for our heritage, our shared future, and the values that had sustained our family through decades of hard work and sacrifice. Arthur and I had dreamed together of the day when Mark, Lisa, and David would take over the farm, carrying forward the traditions we had built with our own hands. We had planned every detail of our succession, ensuring that the land would remain in family hands, while providing me with the security I would need in my golden years. Then, just weeks after Arthur's funeral, when the soil was still fresh on his grave and my heart was raw with grief, my world collapsed in a way I never could have imagined. Mark, who had appointed himself executor of his father's estate, revealed what he claimed was a new will, a document that completely disinherited me and left the entire farm solely to him, Lisa, and David. They had already planned a $3 million cash payout, with Mark needing $500,000 to clear his personal debts. When I questioned this impossible document, my own children accused me of losing my mind. They presented manipulated videos of me forgetting minor details taken completely out of context to suggest dementia. "You're a liability," Mark screamed at me, with venom I had never heard before. "You have no humanity." My grandson Ethan sneered, his young face twisted with manufactured contempt. My dignity, my competence, my very sanity, all brutally stripped away as my beloved farm was stolen from beneath my feet. I felt utterly discarded, dehumanized, profoundly disrespected by the very people I had sacrificed everything to protect and provide for. Yet as despair threatened to consume me entirely, something awakened deep within me. A dairy farmer's unwavering sense of justice ignited a cold fury that surprised even me. What Mark, Lisa, David, and their accomplices didn't know was my secret weapon, meticulous farm logbooks that proved Arthur's original will and his true intentions. More importantly, I had discovered crucial post office security footage showing Mark intercepting and swapping documents directly implicating him in forgery and fraud. My retired investigative reporter, Ally, was waiting in the wings, ready to help me expose the truth. This time, their insidious plot wouldn't just unravel, it would expose their shocking lack of humanity, reclaim my farm, and restore my dignity, proving once and for all that truth triumphs over greed, no matter how sophisticated the lies or how cruel the betrayal. The confrontation began on a gray October morning, exactly 3 weeks after we had laid Arthur to rest in the small cemetery overlooking our fields. I had called a family meeting at our farmhouse, the same kitchen table where we had shared thousands of meals, where I had helped my children with homework, where Arthur and I had planned our future and dreamed of passing this legacy to the next generation. Mark arrived, first accompanied by his wife Brenda, both wearing expressions of grim determination that should have warned me of what was coming. Lisa followed, her eyes red with tears, but her jaw set with resolve. David, my youngest, at 32, entered last, avoiding my gaze entirely as he took his seat across from me. "Mom." Mark began, his voice carrying an authority I had never heard him use with me before. "We need to discuss Dad's estate and your future care. There are some things about Dad's final wishes that might be difficult for you to understand." I felt a chill run down my spine, but I tried to maintain hope that this was simply about the practical details of transition, about how we would manage the farm together in Arthur's absence. "What do you mean, son?" I asked, reaching across the table to touch his hand. "Your father and I discussed everything thoroughly. The will is clear. The farm remains in family hands, with provisions for my care and your eventual inheritance." Mark pulled his hand away from mine with a coldness that made my heart skip a beat. "That's just it, Mom. Dad made some changes before he died. Changes that you apparently weren't aware of." He produced a manila folder containing what appeared to be legal documents, spreading them across the table with the efficiency of someone who had practiced this moment many times. "This is Dad's real will," he announced, his face cold and devoid of the warmth I had known for 35 years. "The one he signed just weeks before his death, when he realized you weren't capable of managing the farm alone. You're clearly not well, Mom. You're losing your mind, and Dad knew it. This farm requires $3 million in immediate investments to remain viable, and I need $500,000 to clear my personal debts so we can move forward as a family unit." The words hit me like physical blows. Not capable. Losing my mind, I had been managing the complex operations of this farm for 40 years, handling everything from crop rotation to financial planning to livestock management. The suggestion that I was mentally incompetent was not just insulting, it was completely divorced from reality. "Mark, that's impossible," I protested, my voice growing stronger as the enormity of what he was suggesting became clear. "Your father would never disinherit me. We planned this transition together. The original will was a mistake." Brenda interrupted, her voice dripping with false concern. "Honestly, Marion, clinging to an old farm when you can't even remember to turn off the stove, it's pathetic. Your brain is broken, and you have no humanity for our financial future. This sale will provide security for all of us." I stared at her in shock. Brenda, who had married into our family just 5 years earlier, was now speaking to me as if I were a confused child rather than the woman who had built the very wealth she was so eager to claim. "This farm is our heritage," I said, my voice breaking with emotion as I appealed to my children's sense of family loyalty. "This is our home, your father's true legacy. Mark, Lisa, David, you know his original will. You know how much love and work I've poured into this land. How can you betray him, betray me for quick cash?" The response from my own children was more devastating than any stranger's cruelty could have been. Lisa, tears streaming down her face, whispered without meeting my eyes, "Mom, please don't make this harder than it needs to be. They're right. You're becoming a burden, and we can't carry that weight anymore." David, my baby. The child I had rocked through countless nights of illness and fear looked at me with eyes that seemed completely empty of love or recognition. "Grandma," he said, using the wrong generational term in a way that suggested I was already mentally gone, "why don't you just die already? You're costing us a fortune with your stubbornness, and we need this money to build our own lives." The casual cruelty in his voice was breathtaking. This was the boy I had taught to milk cows, who had followed me around the farm like a devoted shadow, who had once told me I was the smartest person he knew. Now he was suggesting I should die for his financial convenience. But Mark and Brenda weren't finished with their assault on my dignity and sanity. They produced what they claimed was undeniable evidence of my mental decline, secretly recorded video clips showing me in moments of normal human forgetfulness. One showed me briefly forgetting where I had placed my car keys. Another captured me turning off a stove burner a few seconds later than usual. A third showed me momentarily confused about what day of the week it was during a particularly stressful morning. Each clip had been carefully edited to remove context, making normal moments of distraction appear like symptoms of severe dementia. The manipulation was sophisticated and cruel, designed to make me doubt my own perceptions while providing legal justification for their actions. "As you can see," Mark said, with the cold efficiency of a prosecutor presenting evidence, "your mental state has deteriorated significantly. We've been documenting these incidents for months, and it's clear you're no longer capable of making sound decisions about complex financial matters." Before I could fully process what was happening, they began physically removing items from my home. Brenda directed the operation, while Mark and David loaded family heirlooms, financial documents, and even some of my clothing into boxes and bags. "We're taking these for safekeeping," Brenda explained with false kindness. "You can't be trusted with valuable items anymore, and we need to secure Dad's important papers." I watched in horror as they carried away photo albums, Arthur's tools, my grandmother's china, set pieces of my life and history that represented decades of love and memory. They handled everything with the casual indifference of people clearing out a storage unit rather than dismantling someone's home. The final humiliation came when Mark informed me that they had already filed a formal legal petition for guardianship seeking to have me declared mentally incapacitated so they could assume complete control of my affairs and sell the farm immediately. "It's all my property now, Mom," Mark stated with a triumphant gleam in his eyes that I had never seen before. "You have no legal claim to any of this anymore. Dad made sure of that. Don't cause trouble, or we'll have to take more drastic measures." When I tried to protest, when I insisted on my right to remain in my own home, on my own land, Mark made a phone call. Within minutes, 2 security guards arrived at my door, strangers who escorted me off my own property while my children watched with cold satisfaction. As I stood on the gravel road that had been my driveway for 40 years, holding nothing but my purse, and watching my family celebrate their victory in the home where I had raised them, I felt the full weight of betrayal settling over me like a suffocating blanket. But even in that moment of complete devastation, something inside me refused to surrender. I was not just Marion, the confused old woman they were portraying me to be. I was Marion, the dairy farmer who had built a $3 million business through intelligence, hard work, and careful planning. I was Marion, the mother who had sacrificed everything for her children's welfare, even when they were too young or selfish to understand the cost. And I was Marion, the fighter who was about to show them exactly what happened when you tried to steal from someone who understood every detail of the empire they were attempting to plunder. The assault on my life and dignity escalated with military precision in the days following my expulsion from the farm. What had begun as a family dispute over inheritance evolved into a sophisticated public relations campaign designed to legitimize my children's theft while destroying any credibility I might have to challenge their actions. Mark and Brenda launched what they called a campaign to rectify Arthur's estate, speaking to neighbors, business associates, and community members about the hidden truths and unforeseen burdens that my husband had apparently left behind. They painted themselves as responsible adults, forced to make difficult decisions about a deteriorating family situation. Dad left us in a really complicated position, Mark told anyone who would listen. Mom's been declining for months, and he was too loyal to address it properly. Now we're stuck trying to manage a $3 million business while caring for someone who can barely remember to feed herself. Brenda took to social media with carefully crafted posts that showcased their suddenly lavish lifestyle. Photos appeared of a brand new luxury SUV, exotic vacation destinations, and expensive restaurant meals, all funded by what they claimed was Mark's wise management of his fair share of the estate. So grateful for Mark's business acumen, one post read, accompanied by a picture of them toasting with champagne on what appeared to be a cruise ship. Finally able to enjoy the fruits of the family's hard work without the burden of outdated farming methods and unrealistic expectations. The subtext was clear to anyone familiar with our family situation. I was the burden they had shed, the outdated obstacle they had overcome to achieve this prosperity. But it was during one of my desperate attempts to contact Lisa that I overheard a conversation that revealed the true depths of their calculation and cruelty. I had gone to Lisa's house, hoping to appeal to whatever maternal love might still exist in her heart, when I heard Brenda's voice through an open window. She was on the phone with someone, and her words stopped me in my tracks. "The old lady is costing us a fortune just by existing," Brenda said with casual viciousness. "All this pretense of caring is just an excuse for her to demand our time and attention. She's a burden we need to shed completely. Once we get her house sold and her assets liquidated, we'll be free to live our own lives without this constant drain on our resources." The chilling clarity of her words hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't about concern for my welfare or even about the farm's financial future. This was about reducing me to a disposable asset, something to be liquidated for cash and then forgotten. My children's concern for my mental health was nothing more than a facade for ruthless financial exploitation. They saw me not as their mother, not as the woman who had devoted her life to their welfare, but as an obstacle to their immediate gratification and financial ambitions. But this moment of devastating clarity also brought back memories of another secret I had kept to protect Mark, a sacrifice that made his current betrayal feel like the cruelest twist of cosmic irony. 20 years earlier, when Mark was a young man just starting his adult life, he had developed a serious gambling problem that threatened to destroy his future and our family's reputation. The debts had mounted to over $150,000 money he had borrowed from increasingly dangerous sources to feed an addiction he couldn't control. Arthur had been furious when he discovered the extent of Mark's financial irresponsibility. He had threatened to disinherit our son entirely, to cut him off from any family support until he proved he could manage money responsibly. He's a grown man who needs to face the consequences of his choices, Arthur had said during one of our private conversations about Mark's crisis. If we keep bailing him out, he'll never learn to be responsible for his own life. But I couldn't bear the thought of watching my son destroyed by his mistakes, especially when I had the power to help him. In secret, without telling Arthur or Mark himself, I had used my personal inheritance from my own parents, over $100,000, that was meant to be my security in case anything happened to our marriage or the farm, to pay off Mark's gambling debts. I had also worked with a sympathetic accountant to create financial records that obscured the source of the funds, making it appear that Mark had somehow managed to pay off his debts through legitimate means. This protected him not only from his creditors, but from his father's wrath and the public shame that would have followed if the community had learned about his gambling problem. I had kept this colossal sacrifice hidden from Mark, never wanting him to bear the guilt of knowing what I had given up for his sake. I had believed that my love and protection would help him grow into the responsible, grateful man I knew he could become. Now, as I listened to him and his wife plan my complete destruction for their financial benefit, the irony was unbearable. The son I had saved from financial ruin was now engineering my own financial annihilation. The money I had sacrificed to protect his future was being used as justification for why I didn't deserve security in my old age. When I tried to subtly allude to the sacrifices I had made over the years, hoping to awaken some sense of gratitude or recognition of my devotion, Mark's response was swift and brutal. "Mom, you're always trying to make me feel guilty with your sacrifices." He snapped, his voice filled with contempt. "Your past choices are your own business. Brenda says you're trying to manipulate us with guilt and sentimentality, and she's right. We're not responsible for your decisions or your current situation." Lisa, standing beside him with tears in her eyes, added her own painful contribution. "Mom, please stop talking about the past. It makes us feel terrible, and it doesn't change anything about what needs to happen now." Even my grandson, Ethan, who had once begged me to teach him about farming and business management, looked at me with coached scorn. "Grandma, you're crazy," he said with the casual cruelty that only children can achieve. "Why don't you just die already so we can all move on with our lives?" The systematic destruction of our relationship was perhaps the cruelest aspect of their campaign. They were using my love for my family as a weapon against me, forcing me to choose between accepting their version of reality or losing any remaining connection to the people I had devoted my life to protecting. But the final insult came when Mark presented what he called a generous settlement offer through his lawyer, Mr. Jenkins. The terms were breathtaking in their calculated cruelty. "Mrs. Marion," Mr. Jenkins announced during a formal meeting in his office, "my clients are prepared to offer you a reasonable resolution to this difficult situation. If you voluntarily agree to the sale of the farm and accept Mark as your legal guardian, they will ensure you receive placement in the finest assisted living facility in the region, Evergreen Sanctuary, which costs $10,000 per month, and a one-time payment of $50,000 to cover your personal expenses. The proposal was designed to strip me of my home, my autonomy, and my dignity, while reducing my life's work to a modest check that wouldn't even cover 2 years of institutional care. It was extortion disguised as generosity, cruelty masqueraded as family concern. Let me understand this correctly," I said, my voice growing stronger as my teaching instincts kicked in. "You want me to give up a $3 million farm that I helped build with 40 years of my life, accept guardianship from people who are actively stealing from me, and move into an institution where I'll be completely dependent on their goodwill for survival, Mr. Jenkins smiled with the cold satisfaction of someone who believed he held all the cards. "Those are very generous terms for someone in your position, Mrs. Marion. Your family is going above and beyond to ensure your care and comfort. Most people with cognitive decline don't receive such consideration." As I sat in that sterile office, surrounded by legal documents designed to erase my autonomy and legitimize my children's theft, I realized that these people would never stop until they had destroyed everything I had worked for and reduced me to a helpless dependent. But they had made one crucial mistake. They assumed that grief and isolation had destroyed my ability to think strategically and gather evidence. They believed that a 67-year-old dairy farmer would be no match for their coordinated campaign of legal and emotional warfare. They were about to learn just how wrong they were. The final assault on my life came with the cold efficiency of a military operation designed to leave me with no resources, no allies, and no hope of resistance. Mark and Brenda had spent weeks laying the groundwork for what they clearly saw as their ultimate victory, my complete removal from the farm and my permanent placement in institutional care where I could no longer interfere with their plans. The team arrived on a Tuesday morning in early November, the kind of gray, cold day that makes everything feel hopeless and final. Mark led the convoy, followed by a van from Evergreen Sanctuary, assisted living facility, and a car containing Dr. Miller, a physician I had never met, who had apparently been hired to provide medical justification for my involuntary commitment. "Mom," Mark announced as he entered my kitchen without knocking, "it's time for you to transition to appropriate care. We've made all the arrangements, and Dr. Miller is here to ensure the process goes smoothly." Dr. Miller, a thin man with cold eyes and a clipboard full of forms, looked around my home with the calculating gaze of someone appraising property rather than assessing a patient. "Mrs. Marianne," he said, without any attempt at warmth or genuine medical concern, "your family has expressed serious concerns about your ability to live independently. I'm here to facilitate your move to a more suitable environment." I tried to explain that I had been living independently just fine, that my mind was clear, and my physical health was good, but Dr. Miller wasn't interested in my input. He had clearly been paid to rubber stamp a predetermined conclusion, and my actual condition was irrelevant to the outcome he had been hired to deliver. The staff from Evergreen Sanctuary moved through my home with practiced efficiency, boxing up my most precious possessions with the casual indifference of people clearing out a storage unit. My grandmother's recipe collection, painstakingly handwritten over decades. My scientific journals documenting 40 years of crop rotation and soil management experiments. Arthur's antique farming tools passed down through 3 generations of his family. Packets of rare heirloom seeds I had collected from around the world. Everything that represented my life's work, my family's history, and my personal identity was being carelessly stuffed into cardboard boxes labeled storage in black marker. "Please," I begged, as I watched them handle Arthur's grandfather's plow with careless efficiency that belonged to my husband's family for over a century. "It's not just a tool, it's a piece of our heritage." The worker shrugged and continued wrapping it in newspaper. "Ma'am, we're just following orders. Your family says you won't need any of this where you're going." As they prepared to physically escort me from my home, I made one final, desperate appeal to Lisa and David, who had arrived to witness my removal. These were the children I had raised with love and sacrifice, the people who should have been my advocates and protectors in my time of vulnerability. "Lisa, David, please," I cried, reaching out to them with all the maternal love I could convey. "Don't let them do this to me. This is our farm, our heritage. You know my mind is clear. You know I'm capable of living independently. Please don't let them destroy everything your father and I built together." Lisa stood, frozen tears streaming down her face, but she made no move to help me. She whispered something to Mark that I couldn't hear, but whatever she said had no impact on the proceedings. David, my youngest child, the boy I had comforted through nightmares and celebrated through achievements, looked at me with eyes that seemed completely empty of recognition or love. He said nothing at all, just stood there watching his mother being dragged away like an unwanted piece of furniture. In that agonizing moment, I understood the profound and irreversible nature of their betrayal. This wasn't a misunderstanding that could be resolved through conversation or compromise. This was a calculated decision by my own flesh and blood to dispose of me as if I were a burden, rather than the woman who had given them life and devoted 40 years to ensuring their prosperity. The humiliation continued even after I was installed in the sterile environment of Evergreen Sanctuary. Mark sent a cold, brief text message to my oldest friend, Mrs. Davies, Mom is settled in appropriate care. Our family requires no further outside contact regarding her situation. She was a burden we finally had to address professionally. Brenda took to social media with posts celebrating their new simplified life without the stress of caring for an elderly relative. Photos appeared of expensive purchases funded by the farm sale designer Furniture Luxury Vacations, high-end electronics, all accompanied by subtle but patronizing remarks about moving forward and making difficult but necessary family decisions. The most devastating blow came from my grandson Ethan, who posted a video on social media that was clearly designed to hurt me as deeply as possible. "My grandma always smelled like cows and farm dirt," he said with practiced contempt. "She was crazy and mean, and now we can finally have a normal family without her making everyone miserable. I'm glad she's gone. Why doesn't she just die already so we can forget about her?" But the cruelest irony of my situation only became clear as I sat alone in the impersonal institutional room that was now supposed to be my home. They had confiscated my phone, limited my access to visitors, and made it clear that any attempts to contact the outside world would result in additional restrictions on my privileges. In that sterile environment, stripped of my possessions and my autonomy, I found myself confronting the most painful secret of my entire life, a sacrifice that made my children's current treatment of me feel like the ultimate cosmic joke. 25 years earlier, after Arthur's death, I had been presented with an opportunity that could have transformed my entire existence. Dr. James Thornfield, a renowned agricultural scientist I had met at a farming conference, had offered me not just romantic companionship, but a chance to pursue the scientific research I had always dreamed of conducting. James was everything Arthur had been practical and grounded about, but with an additional dimension of intellectual curiosity and global perspective that had awakened parts of my mind I had forgotten existed. He offered me a partnership in agricultural research that would have taken us around the world, studying sustainable farming practices in different climates and cultures. More than that, he offered me love companionship and the chance to build a new life focused on my own intellectual and emotional fulfillment rather than the endless demands of family obligation. I had been on the verge of accepting his proposal of selling the farm and embarking on an adventure that would have given me 20 years of scientific achievement and personal happiness. But Mark, struggling with the emotional burden of his father's death and terrified by the prospect of change, had begged me not to abandon him. "Mom, I can't handle you leaving too," he had sobbed during one of our conversations about my future. "Dad's gone, and if you go away with this stranger, I'll have lost both my parents. Please don't choose him over your family. Please don't abandon me when I need you most." Out of boundless maternal love and my deep desire to protect my son's emotional stability, I had given up my chance at a second life of scientific achievement and personal fulfillment. I had turned down James's proposal and dedicated the next 25 years of my life to ensuring my children's security and prosperity. I had sacrificed my deepest dreams, my intellectual potential, and my chance at mature love because my son had convinced me that his emotional well-being depended on my presence and devotion. Now, as I sat in an institutional facility where my son had placed me against my will, where he was spending my life savings on luxury items while I was denied basic dignity and autonomy, the irony was staggering. The child I had sacrificed everything to protect had repaid my devotion by treating me like a disposable burden. Every dream I had given up, every opportunity I had rejected, every personal desire I had set aside for his welfare, had been transformed into the justification for my current imprisonment. My love had been weaponized against me by the very person I had loved most unconditionally. But as I sat in that sterile room, surrounded by the institutional furniture and industrial carpeting that was supposed to represent my new life, I felt something awakening within me that was stronger than grief or despair. I was 67 years old, imprisoned by my own children, and branded as mentally incompetent by people who had stolen my life's work. But I was also a woman who had spent 4 decades building a $3 million business through intelligent strategic thinking and meticulous record-keeping, and I still had weapons they didn't know about. The war for my dignity, my legacy, and my freedom was about to begin. The days at Evergreen Sanctuary blurred into a nightmare of systematic neglect and deliberate dehumanization that made me question whether my children had simply abandoned me or actively conspired to ensure my suffering. What I had expected to be institutional care revealed itself as something far more sinister, a place where inconvenient elderly people were warehoused and forgotten while their families moved on with their lives. My call, like the only connection between my bed and the possibility of human assistance, was routinely ignored for hours at a time. I would press the button when I needed help getting to the bathroom, when I was in pain, when I simply needed water, and then lie there listening to the sounds of staff going about their duties while my urgent needs went unaddressed. Please, I would call out when I heard footsteps in the hallway. I've been waiting for 3 hours. Can someone please help me? The responses, when they came at all, were delivered with the weary indifference of people who had long since stopped seeing residents as human beings rather than inconvenient obligations. "We'll get to you when we can," became the standard reply. There are a lot of people here who need help. My pain medication was consistently delayed, sometimes by 6 or 8 hours past the prescribed time, leading to periods of excruciating suffering that seemed designed to break down whatever resistance I might have left. When I complained about the delays, I was told that I was being difficult and that pain builds character. The neglect of basic hygiene was perhaps the most dehumanizing aspect of my imprisonment. I was bathed irregularly, sometimes going a week without proper washing, leading to painful bed sores that became infected and added to my physical misery. My sheets were changed infrequently, and my clothes were often soiled from accidents that occurred when no one responded to my calls for assistance. Meals arrived cold, unappetizing, and served at irregular intervals that disrupted any sense of normal routine or dignity. The food was institutional slop that bore no resemblance to the fresh, wholesome meals I had prepared on the farm for 40 years. When I tried to refuse the barely edible offerings, I was told that beggars can't be choosers and that my family wasn't paying for gourmet service. The overworked and indifferent staff treated me as just another number, a non-human inconvenience that required minimal attention to keep alive, but no consideration as a person with feelings, intelligence, or dignity. I overheard their cynical comments about residents whose families dump them and never visit, amplifying my despair and confirming that my situation was neither unique nor temporary. Another one whose kids took the money and ran, one aide said during a shift change, apparently referring to me. They always promise to visit, but once they get what they want, these old folks never see family again. But the psychological torture was compounded by what my children were doing to my life's work while I was imprisoned and helpless to defend it. Through conversations with Mrs. Davies, my oldest friend who managed to visit, despite Mark's attempts to isolate me completely, I learned that my beloved dairy herd animals I had raised from calves, whose bloodlines I had carefully developed over decades, had been sold off to the highest bidder. My rare heritage seed varieties, collected from around the world and carefully preserved for their genetic diversity and environmental adaptation, had been dispersed to commercial dealers who saw them as curiosities rather than scientific treasures. Most devastating of all my original barn, the heart of our farming operation, where I had conducted experiments in sustainable agriculture and developed innovations in crop rotation and soil management, had been converted into a generic commercial storage facility. The place where I had pursued my scientific passion was now a soulless warehouse where strangers stored their excess possessions. Brenda posted photos online of what she called the renovated modern property, showing sleek new buildings and manicured lawns that bore no trace of my scientific vision or my lifelong passion for sustainable land management. She had erased not just my physical presence, but any evidence that I had ever contributed anything meaningful to the farm's success. Finally, bringing this property into the 21st century, she wrote in one post, accompanied by photos of the sterile commercial buildings that had replaced my research facilities. It's amazing what you can accomplish when you're not held back by outdated ideas and sentimental attachments to the past. But the cruelest blow was yet to come, orchestrated by my own family with a sophistication that revealed the true depths of their calculated malice. Mark and Brenda arranged for Ethan and Chloe, my grandchildren, to participate in a widely publicized seniors awareness campaign at their school, supposedly designed to promote understanding and compassion for elderly people in the community. The irony was staggering. They were using my grandchildren to promote sympathy for exactly the kind of elder abuse they were perpetrating against me. During their presentation, captured by local media and shared widely on social media, Ethan and Chloe held up drawings of sad grandmas and spoke about the importance of caring for our elderly, while subtly contrasting it with their own difficult situation with me. Sometimes elderly family members become confused and make unreasonable demands, Ethan explained to the audience with coached sincerity. It's important to get them professional help instead of letting them hurt themselves and their families. Chloe, my 14-year-old granddaughter, whom I had taught to garden and love the natural world, held up a photograph of me that had clearly been selected to make me look disoriented and frail. "This is our grandma," she said with practiced sadness. "She used to be really smart, but now she gets confused and says things that don't make sense. We want people to know that it's okay to get help for family members who can't take care of themselves anymore." The public display of detached pity from my beloved grandchildren, broadcast for the entire community to see, shattered what remained of my soul. These children, whom I had loved unconditionally and who had once begged me to tell them stories about the farm, were now performing a carefully choreographed presentation designed to justify my imprisonment and legitimize my family's theft. The psychological assault was compounded by legal pressure designed to strip away my final shreds of autonomy and self-respect. Mark and Lisa, working through Mr. Jenkins, attempted to pressure me into signing a formal release of all claims document that would make me agree to relinquish all rights to my past assets and any proceeds from the farm's sale. "Mrs. Marion," Mr. Jenkins explained during one of his visits to the facility, "your family wants to resolve this situation amicably. If you simply sign this document acknowledging that you understand your current limitations and agree to their management of your affairs, they'll ensure you continue to receive appropriate care here. The threat was implicit, but clear refuse to sign away my rights, and even the minimal care I was receiving might be withdrawn. The relentless stress of this legal pressure, combined with the facility's systematic neglect, caused my physical health to deteriorate rapidly, making me appear even more fragile and confused to any outsiders who might question my treatment. In my deepest moment of despair, when I was beginning to wonder if death might be preferable to this slow destruction of my dignity and identity, Mrs. Davies managed one more visit that changed everything. She arrived during a shift change when the staff was distracted, slipping into my room with the stealth of someone who understood that her presence was unwelcome. In her hand was a small worn seed packet from my rare heritage collection seeds I had saved from a variety of winter wheat that could survive in harsh climates and poor soil conditions. "I managed to save this before they threw everything away," she whispered, pressing the packet into my hands. "I thought you should have something from your real work, your real life." As I held that small packet of seeds, feeling their weight and potential in my trembling fingers, something awakened within me that was stronger than despair or defeat. These seeds represented 40 years of scientific work, of careful selection and preservation of my contribution to agricultural knowledge and sustainable farming practices. I was not just Marion, the confused old woman my family was portraying me to be. I was Marion, the agricultural scientist, the innovative farmer, the woman who had built a $3 million enterprise through intelligence and hard work. And if I could survive long enough to tell my story, these seeds would be proof of who I really was and what I had really accomplished. For the first time in months, I felt something that resembled hope. 6 months after my imprisonment at Evergreen Sanctuary, Mark and Brenda orchestrated what they called the ultimate vindication of their actions, a nationally publicized agricultural progress and land development conference that would forever change how I viewed the depths of their cruelty and ambition. Using the reputation they had built by stealing my life's work and the connections they had made through their newfound wealth, Mark positioned himself as the keynote speaker for a prestigious conference designed to showcase innovative approaches to agricultural modernization and land value maximization. The event was held at a major convention center with attendance from agricultural economists, land developers, and farming corporations from across the country. The centerpiece of Mark's presentation was a detailed analysis of our farm's transformation from what he called inefficient traditional methods to profitable modern practices. Using data stolen from my confiscated scientific journals and logbooks, he had carefully manipulated decades of my research to support a narrative that painted my agricultural methods as outdated and economically unsustainable. Ladies and gentlemen, Mark began his presentation with the confident authority of someone who had convinced himself that his lies were truth. I want to share with you a case study that illustrates the dramatic improvements possible when we move beyond sentimental attachments to traditional farming and embrace evidence-based land management. He displayed charts and graphs that had been selectively edited from my meticulous records, showing only the data that supported his predetermined conclusions, while omitting the context that would have revealed the true success of my sustainable farming practices. My innovations in crop rotation, which had consistently increased yields while improving soil health, were presented as inconsistent productivity patterns. My experiments with heritage seed varieties, which had produced more resilient crops with better nutritional profiles, were dismissed as inefficient resource allocation. The sophistication of his manipulation was breathtaking. Mark had clearly spent months studying my scientific work, not to understand or appreciate it, but to find ways to distort it into evidence of my incompetence and his superiority. The previous management, he continued carefully avoiding any mention of my name or role in developing the very innovations he was claiming credit for, was constrained by outdated methodologies and an emotional attachment to inefficient practices. By implementing modern business principles and scientific land management, we were able to increase profitability by over 300% while reducing environmental impact. Every claim was a lie built on the foundation of my stolen work. The environmental improvements he credited to his management had actually been developed through my decades of research into sustainable farming practices. The efficiency gains he claimed had been achieved through my careful soil management and innovative crop selection. The modernization he celebrated was simply the destruction of the very systems that had made those improvements possible. Brenda reinforced Mark's presentation with testimonials that were cruel in their calculated dismissiveness of my contributions and character. The previous management had a beautiful but increasingly confusing passion for what she called working with the soil, Brenda told the audience with practiced condescension. But passion without practical results is just sentimentality, and you can't run a modern agricultural operation based on emotional attachments to dirt. The audience of business professionals nodded knowingly, accepting without question the narrative that painted me as a well-meaning but incompetent woman whose confusion about modern farming practices had held back the farm's true potential. It was heartbreaking to watch someone we cared about lose touch with reality. Brenda continued with false sympathy. She would spend hours talking about soil composition and seed genetics as if those things mattered more than actual productivity and profit margins. We realized that helping her meant taking responsibility for decisions she was no longer capable of making rationally. I learned about the conference from a board staff member at Evergreen Sanctuary who was watching the national news coverage while she was supposed to be monitoring residents. "Hey, isn't this your family?" she asked with casual indifference, pointing at the television screen where Mark and Brenda were being interviewed about their innovative approach to agricultural transformation. I was forced to watch in agonizing silence as my son smiled and posed beside charts and graphs that had been built from my stolen scientific data, presenting my lifelong research as evidence of his own brilliance while portraying me as an obstacle he had overcome through superior knowledge and compassion. The sight of my scientific legacy being twisted into a public performance of my incompetence and irrationality was unbearable. I began to shake uncontrollably, tears streaming down my face as I witnessed the systematic destruction of everything I had worked for and believed in. But the most devastating moment came when my grandson Ethan appeared in a pre-recorded video segment designed to add emotional weight to Mark's presentation. My 16-year-old grandson, whom I had taught to appreciate the complexity and beauty of agricultural science, spoke with coached conviction about his newfound appreciation for business analytics and data-driven decision-making. I've learned so much about the importance of moving beyond sentimental attachments to old things like soil samples and seed collections. Ethan said, looking directly into the camera with the earnest expression that had once melted my heart when he asked me to explain crop genetics. My family has taught me that true environmental stewardship means maximizing efficiency and profitability, not getting emotional about outdated farming methods. Every word was a knife in my heart. This was the boy who had once spent hours with me in the fields, learning to identify different soil types and understanding how plant breeding could create more resilient crops. Now he was publicly endorsing a philosophy that reduced my life's work to emotional attachment and dismissed my scientific innovations as outdated methods. Chloe's contribution was equally devastating, but delivered with the casual cruelty that only teenagers can achieve. My 14-year-old granddaughter appeared in a brief video clip, giggling as she held up one of my old soil samples that had somehow been preserved as a prop for their presentation. Grandma used to dig in this stuff all the time. She laughed, her voice bright with youthful dismissal. So dirty and gross. We prefer digital farming now, with computers and apps that tell you everything you need to know without getting your hands dirty. Her laughter felt like glass, cutting through whatever remained of my heart. This was the little girl who had once helped me plant seeds and asked endless questions about how plants grew and why different varieties thrived in different conditions. Now she was mocking the very work that had made her family's prosperity possible. The conference continued for 3 days, with Mark building a national platform based on the systematic destruction of my reputation and the perversion of my scientific contributions. He received consulting offers from agribusiness corporations, speaking invitations from land development firms, and media requests from agricultural publications looking to profile his breakthrough insights into modern farming. My lifetime of scientific achievement had been transformed into his career opportunity, built on lies and theft, but packaged as innovation and progress. But then something unexpected happened that gave me the first glimpse of hope I'd felt in months. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a respected retired agronomist who had been my colleague and friend for over 20 years, attended the conference and was disgusted by what she witnessed. Dr. Mitchell recognized the data Mark was presenting because she had collaborated with me on some of the research he was claiming as his own. She understood immediately that the innovations he was crediting to his management were actually my developments, perverted and misrepresented to serve his narrative. More importantly, she remembered my character, my scientific integrity, and my genuine contributions to sustainable agriculture research. The suggestion that I was mentally incompetent or scientifically outdated contradicted everything she knew about my work and my capabilities. Dr. Mitchell discreetly contacted my legal advocates, offering to provide a professional affidavit vouching for my scientific competence and the validity of my research methods. Her statement carried the weight of decades of professional collaboration and peer recognition. I have worked with Marion for over 20 years, both as a colleague and as a fellow researcher. Her affidavit stated, "She represents the highest standards of agricultural science and innovation. Her research into sustainable farming practices was decades ahead of its time, and her methods consistently produce superior results. The suggestion that she is experiencing cognitive decline or that her work was somehow inferior is not just wrong, it's an insult to the entire field of agricultural science." As I lay in my institutional bed that night, reading Dr. Mitchell's statement with the help of Mrs. Davies, who had smuggled it in during another covert visit, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months, validation from someone who truly understood my work and my character. The conference had been Mark's triumph, but it had also created a documented record of his lies and theft. His success was built on stolen intellectual property and false claims that could be exposed if I could find the strength and resources to fight back. I was 67 years old, imprisoned in a facility that treated me like a burden, watching my life's work being perverted for profit. But I was also a scientist who understood that the most important discoveries often came from the most careful analysis of evidence. Mark had made one crucial mistake. In his eagerness to claim credit for my innovations, he had created a public record of work that he couldn't possibly have developed himself, given his complete lack of scientific training and his history of viewing the farm as nothing more than a source of quick cash. The seeds of his downfall were contained in his own lies, and I was finally ready to help them grow. Mark's assault on my remaining shreds of dignity and autonomy came with the methodical precision of someone who had studied every possible avenue for destroying a person's will to resist. Having established his credibility as an agricultural innovator and having successfully portrayed me as a mentally incompetent burden, he now possessed the platform and legal authority necessary to complete my annihilation. The final financial barrage began with a lawsuit so comprehensive and malicious that it took my breath away when Mr. Jenkins explained it to me during one of his visits to Evergreen Sanctuary. Mark was suing me personally for $1 million in emotional distress, damages claiming that my harassment and false accusations about the farm's management had destroyed his reputation and caused him severe psychological trauma. The lawsuit alleged that my paranoid delusions about inheritance fraud and my attempts to undermine his legitimate business decisions had created a hostile family environment that threatened his mental health and his ability to manage the agricultural enterprise he had inherited from his father. According to the filing, my refusal to accept appropriate medical care and my persistent accusations against family members had made it impossible for him to maintain normal business relationships. Your son is seeking compensation for the damage your behavior has caused to his professional standing, Mr. Jenkins explained with the cold efficiency of someone delivering a death sentence. The agricultural community has expressed concerns about the family conflict, and several business partnerships have been affected by the negative publicity surrounding your accusations. But the lawsuit was just the opening move in a coordinated attack that demonstrated the full scope of Mark's strategic planning. While I struggled to understand how I could be held legally responsible for emotional distress from my position of imprisonment and powerlessness, he launched a parallel assault on my professional standing and any remaining financial resources. Mark contacted my former university and the agricultural associations where I had maintained memberships for decades, expressing deep concern about my mental competence and my fitness to have ever conducted scientific research. His carefully crafted communications suggested that my recent erratic behavior and paranoid tendencies raised questions about the validity of my past work and my ability to have made sound scientific judgments throughout my career. My family is concerned that my mother's mental deterioration may have been affecting her research quality for years. Mark wrote in a formal complaint to the Agricultural Science Board. We're worried that her current paranoid episodes and detachment from reality might call into question the reliability of her past publications and experiments. The bureaucratic machinery moved with frightening efficiency. Within weeks, my scientific pension was permanently revoked, along with all professional honors I had earned over 4 decades of distinguished research. The official letters cited serious concerns about research integrity and current mental fitness issues that retroactively call into question past scientific contributions. The irony was staggering. Mark was using my own research, the work he had stolen and perverted for his conference presentations, as evidence that I was mentally unfit to have conducted that research in the first place. My innovations were simultaneously valuable enough to build his reputation on and worthless enough to justify stripping me of credit for developing them. I was now completely destitute, with no income, no assets, no legal standing, and mounting debts that grew larger every day. The lifetime of careful financial planning I had done was destroyed by a system designed to protect the integrity of scientific research, but weaponized against me by my own son. The forced eviction from even the minimal shelter of Evergreen Sanctuary was deliberately timed for maximum humiliation. Mark had been monitoring my financial situation through his network of legal and professional connections, and he ensured that local news cameras would be present when I was removed from the facility for non-payment. The footage was devastating. A 67-year-old woman who had once commanded respect in agricultural circles, now standing on a sidewalk with her few remaining possessions stuffed into garbage bags, looking confused and defeated as social workers tried to figure out where to place someone with no family support and no financial resources. The news story that accompanied the footage painted me as a cautionary tale about the dangers of family conflict and the tragic consequences of mental decline in elderly individuals. Former agricultural researcher loses everything in family dispute. The headline read, "Children say they tried to help, but she refused professional treatment. My own children maintained their chilling indifference throughout my public disgrace." When contacted by reporters for comment, Mark issued a statement that cut deeper than any legal document. My mother made her choices. She had multiple opportunities to accept appropriate care and resolve this situation peacefully, but she chose conflict over family harmony. I have no legal or moral obligation to support someone who has consistently refused help and chosen to alienate her own family. Lisa reinforced Mark's narrative through carefully crafted social media posts about her busy schedule and exciting new projects, subtly implying that she was too focused on positive developments to get involved in the drama surrounding me. David, my youngest, avoided all contact entirely, as if I had simply ceased to exist. Their ability to look through me as if I were invisible when we occasionally crossed paths in town confirmed their complete emotional abandonment. I had become a non-person to the children I had raised with love and sacrifice. But it was Brenda who delivered the cruelest twist of the knife with a display of calculated audacity that revealed the true depths of her malice. Using funds from the farm's $3 million sale money that should have provided security for my old age, she purchased a massive custom-built smart farm demonstration facility that she dedicated to Mark's business acumen and foresight in maximizing family assets. The state-of-the-art facility cost over $500,000 and was designed as a showcase for modern agricultural technology and data-driven farming methods. The dedication ceremony was publicized throughout the region, with Brenda giving interviews about the importance of transforming inherited assets into productive investments and moving beyond sentimental attachments to outdated farming methods. This facility represents Mark's incredible vision for the future of agriculture. Brenda told the local newspaper during the ribbon-cutting ceremony, "Instead of clinging to old-fashioned methods that prioritize sentiment over efficiency, he's created a space that will educate the next generation of farmers about the importance of business-focused agriculture." The photos from the event were shared widely on social media, showing Mark and Brenda smiling as they unveiled a plaque dedicating the facility to innovative agricultural leadership and the courage to embrace progress. Every image was a brutal reminder that my life savings were being used to create a monument to everything I had opposed: industrial agriculture that prioritized profit over sustainability and technology over understanding. The irony was staggering. My own money was being used to build a facility that would teach other farmers to reject the very principles of sustainable agriculture that I had spent my life developing and promoting. The relentless psychological and financial siege finally broke my body in ways that my mind had somehow managed to resist. On a cold February morning, while seeking shelter at a homeless facility that could only house me for 3 days at a time, I collapsed with what the emergency room doctors later diagnosed as a massive stress-induced heart attack. I lay unconscious for 5 days, my life hanging by a thread in the charity ward of the county hospital. The medical staff told me later that no family members had come to visit, no one had called to check on my condition. I was simply another indigent patient whose emergency contact information led to voicemail boxes that were never returned. But during those dark hours of unconsciousness, something remarkable happened in the depths of my compromised consciousness. Buried memories began to surface, fragments of a scientific conference I had attended 30 years earlier that I had somehow suppressed or forgotten in the chaos of recent events. The conference had dealt with sustainable land use and environmental protection, and I had been part of a heated debate about the long-term consequences of intensive agricultural development. During the proceedings, I had argued passionately against practices that prioritize short-term profit over soil health and environmental sustainability. In my dreamlike state, I saw David's face, my youngest son, who had been studying business and land development, superimposed over the memory of that conference. I realized with stunning clarity that the aggressive land development practices Mark and David were now implementing were exactly the unsustainable methods I had spent my career fighting against. They weren't just stealing my money and my reputation. They were systematically destroying the environmental principles I had dedicated my life to protecting. The land I had carefully stewarded for 40 years was being strip-mined for immediate profit with no consideration for the long-term consequences of their actions. As I lay in that hospital bed, barely alive and completely alone, I realized that my fight wasn't just about money or family loyalty anymore. It was about protecting the land itself from people who saw it as nothing more than a commodity to be exploited. I was 67 years old and had lost everything except the one thing that mattered most: my understanding of what was truly at stake in this battle. This wasn't just about my personal dignity or financial security. It was about the difference between stewardship and exploitation, between sustainable agriculture and industrial destruction. Mark and his allies had made one crucial mistake. They assumed that destroying my reputation and my resources would end my ability to fight back. But they had also awakened something deeper than personal grievance, a professional and moral commitment to protecting the land from the very people who were claiming to be its rightful inheritors. My recovery from the heart attack was slow and painful, but it gave me something I hadn't had in over a year time to think clearly without the constant barrage of legal threats and institutional neglect. The recovered memories of that environmental conference had crystallized into a plan, a final attempt to reach whatever conscience might still exist within my children's hearts. The parallels between that 30-year-old debate and my current situation were too precise to be coincidental. I began to suspect that Mark hadn't just stumbled upon these destructive agricultural practices. He had deliberately chosen methods that represented everything I had spent my career opposing, perhaps, as the ultimate act of rebellion against my values and authority. With the help of Maria, my compassionate nurse, who had become my only reliable ally in the hospital, I managed to record a video message from my bed. Despite my obvious frailty and the toll that recent months had taken on my appearance, I spoke with the clarity and conviction that had once made me a respected voice in agricultural science. The 25-minute recording was unlike anything I had ever created. Instead of personal appeals or emotional pleas, I presented scientific evidence. I played audio recordings I had made during family meetings, conversations where Mark had privately admitted his plans to liquidate all the old woman's sentimental attachments, and his calculations about how to maximize the property's commercial value without worrying about environmental impact. The Mark Lisa David. I said, looking directly into the camera with all the professional authority I could muster, I want you to hear your own words, your own voices speaking the truth about what this has really been about. I want you to understand that this isn't just about inheritance or family dynamics. It's about the fundamental principles of environmental stewardship that your father and I spent 40 years developing. I also revealed something that I had never shared: publicly detailed documentation of the environmental damage that their aggressive development practices were already causing to the land. Soil erosion, water contamination, and the destruction of beneficial microorganisms that had taken decades to cultivate were all consequences of their profit-focused approach to land management. You're not just stealing from me, I explained with the patient tone I had once used to teach complex scientific concepts. You're stealing from future generations who will inherit land that has been strip mined for immediate profit. The sustainable practices we developed weren't just sentimental attachments. They were scientific innovations that protected the long-term productivity of the soil. The recording was my last desperate attempt to awaken some recognition of the larger implications of their actions, to help them understand that their choices would have consequences far beyond our immediate family conflict. But I had underestimated the sophistication of the surveillance network that had been monitoring my every move. Maria, exhausted from her long shifts and genuinely concerned about family healing, had agreed to deliver the video message directly to Mark and Lisa. But Brenda had been cultivating relationships with hospital staff for months, occasionally bringing small gifts and expressing concern about my mental state to employees who had access to my room. When Maria left the hospital with my video, she was intercepted in the parking lot by Brenda, who convinced her that she was deeply worried about my emotional state and wanted to preview the message to ensure it wouldn't cause additional trauma to the family. I know Marion means well, Brenda told Maria with practiced sincerity, but she's been saying some very disturbing things lately about environmental conspiracies and scientific fraud. I just want to make sure this message won't make our situation more difficult for everyone involved. Maria, genuinely believing she was helping to protect a vulnerable family, handed over the video to Brenda without knowing she was giving it to the very person who had orchestrated my destruction. What happened next was a masterpiece of digital manipulation and media exploitation that destroyed any remaining hope I had for justice or reconciliation. Brenda took my raw emotional video and subjected it to sophisticated editing techniques that transformed my scientific evidence into apparent proof of mental instability and paranoid delusions. She altered audio levels to make my voice sound more strained and disconnected, added subtle background noise during key statements that suggested confusion, and carefully spliced segments to change the context and meaning of my words. My earnest presentation of environmental data became evidence of obsessive behavior. My documented recordings of Mark's admissions became fabricated evidence created by a confused old woman. My scientific concerns about land management became grandiose fantasies about my own importance. Most devastatingly, Brenda sold this heavily doctored video to a national news network as an exclusive story about elder mental health and family conflict. The segment was titled, "When Science Becomes Delusion, A Researcher's Desperate Claims Exposed," and it portrayed me as a textbook case of age-related paranoia combined with professional narcissism. Dr. Jonathan Pierce, a television psychiatrist who had never met me, provided expert commentary that pathologized everything I had said and done. What we're seeing here is a classic case of elderly grandiosity combined with persecution delusions, he explained to the national audience. The subject has created an elaborate fantasy involving environmental conspiracies and scientific fraud to avoid accepting responsibility for her own deteriorating condition and the natural consequences of family intervention. The edited video made me appear delusional and potentially dangerous. My carefully documented scientific evidence was presented as either fabricated or misunderstood due to my mental deterioration. My concerns about environmental damage were dismissed as the confused rambling of someone who could no longer distinguish between scientific fact and personal opinion. But the killing blow came when Mark and Lisa appeared on the program for what was billed as an exclusive interview about coping with a parent's mental decline. My children sat in the television studio, looking composed and sympathetic, speaking with the measured tones of responsible adults dealing with an impossible situation. They portrayed themselves as loving family members struggling to help a mother who had become increasingly unstable and resistant to appropriate care. It's heartbreaking to watch someone you love lose touch with reality. Mark said, his voice cracking with what appeared to be genuine emotion. My mother was once a respected researcher, someone who made real contributions to agricultural science. But age and isolation have taken a terrible toll on her ability to think clearly. The interviewer nodded sympathetically. How do you maintain your love for someone while protecting yourself and your family from their destructive behavior? You have to set boundaries, Lisa replied with coached wisdom. You have to accept that the person you once knew may be gone, replaced by someone who is no longer capable of rational thought or healthy relationships. It's painful, but you can't let one person's mental health crisis destroy an entire family's well-being. Then they brought Ethan onto the program, my 17-year-old grandson, looking appropriately serious, as he spoke about his concern for my welfare and his family's attempts to help me get professional treatment. I love my grandmother, Ethan said with practiced sincerity that broke my heart. But I've had to accept that the person making these environmental conspiracy claims isn't really her anymore. We just want her to be safe and get the help she needs. The program reached millions of viewers nationwide, cementing my reputation as a cautionary tale about the dangers of untreated mental illness in elderly family members. Social media comments ranged from sympathy for my condition to praise for my family's mature handling of a tragic situation. I watched the broadcast from my hospital bed, feeling as though I was witnessing my own public execution. Every word I had spoken in scientific accuracy and environmental concern had been twisted into evidence of my instability. My children, the people I had raised to value truth and integrity, were now publicly diagnosing me as mentally ill for a national audience. But even in my darkest moment of complete despair, help was coming from an unexpected source. Dr. Robert Chen, a retired environmental lawyer who specialized in agricultural policy and land use regulation, had been watching the broadcast with growing concern. Something about the environmental claims I had made, even in their edited form, suggested a level of scientific knowledge and legitimate concern that contradicted the narrative of mental instability. Dr. Chen contacted my small legal support team, offering his services to analyze both the digital evidence and the underlying environmental issues I had raised. His preliminary findings were shocking. The video had been edited at over 70 different points, with audio levels, artificially adjusted background, noise, added post-production, and numerous segments spliced together from different recordings. This isn't just editing for clarity or time, Dr. Chen explained to my advocates. This is deliberate manipulation designed to change meaning and create false impressions. The original recording shows a coherent, knowledgeable scientist presenting legitimate environmental concerns. The broadcast version shows a confused, unstable person making paranoid accusations. More importantly, Dr. Chen's investigation into Mark's land development practices had uncovered evidence of potentially illegal environmental violations that corroborated my scientific concerns. Soil contamination from improper chemical applications, water table pollution from inadequate waste management, and the destruction of protected wetland areas were all documented consequences of the aggressive development methods Mark had implemented. Mrs. Marion wasn't making paranoid accusations, Dr. Chen's preliminary report stated. She was identifying legitimate environmental damage that appears to violate multiple state and federal regulations. Her scientific concerns were not only valid, they were prophetic warnings about practices that are causing measurable harm to the ecosystem. As I lay in that hospital bed reading Dr. Chen's findings with the help of Maria, who had smuggled them in during a shift change, I realized that my family's public betrayal had inadvertently provided the evidence I needed to expose not just their fraud, but their environmental crimes. They had stolen my voice and used it as a weapon against me. But in doing so, they had revealed the true scope of their destruction and their willingness to commit not just personal betrayal, but ecological vandalism for immediate profit. The war was entering its final phase, and for the first time in over a year, I wasn't fighting alone. Truth, it seemed, had allies in places my family had never imagined, and justice was about to demand an accounting for more than just stolen inheritance. It was going to demand restitution for a violated land that could no longer speak for itself. The seeds of their downfall, like the heritage varieties I had spent decades cultivating, were finally ready to bear fruit. 9 months after my near-death experience in the hospital, I stood before the federal courthouse in downtown Chicago, surrounded by a legal team that would have been unthinkable during my darkest days. An unexpected windfall from a land conservation trust I had documented but forgotten during my imprisonment, combined with Dr. Chen's connections to environmental advocacy groups, had provided the resources I needed to hire the most formidable alliance imaginable. Dr. Elizabeth Carter, the retired agricultural lawyer who had spent her career fighting corporate land grabs, Margaret Walsh, a community organizer who specialized in elder abuse cases, and James Patterson, a prominent investigative journalist whose exposés of agricultural fraud had earned national recognition. Together, they represented everything Mark, Brenda, and their conspirators had never imagined they would face. We were launching a massive federal civil and criminal lawsuit against Mark and Brenda for fraud, elder abuse, financial exploitation, and national defamation. The case had attracted international attention, with legal scholars calling it a landmark battle against sophisticated inheritance fraud and environmental destruction disguised as agricultural modernization. But the global attention wasn't what mattered to me. What mattered was the collection of hidden camera footage that had been captured by security systems I had installed years earlier to monitor equipment theft recordings that would finally reveal the truth about my children's character and their systematic conspiracy to destroy me. The courtroom was packed beyond capacity with overflow seating arranged for the hundreds of journalists, legal professionals, environmental advocates, and elder rights activists who had come to witness this reckoning. Cameras from major networks captured every moment as Dr. Carter stood to present our evidence. Your Honor, she began addressing Federal Judge Patricia Morrison, who was presiding over the case. We are here today not just to seek justice for Mrs. Marion, but to expose a conspiracy that represents one of the most sophisticated and cruel forms of elder abuse, inheritance fraud, and environmental destruction we have ever encountered. The first video we played sent shockwaves through the silent courtroom. It was Mark's voice, captured by the hidden camera system in our farm office during one of his planning sessions with Brenda just weeks after Arthur's death. The old woman thinks she'll keep control of this land forever. Mark's voice echoed through the speakers with chilling clarity. We need to fabricate enough evidence of her mental incompetence to get her declared unfit. If we play this right, we can clear my $500,000 in debt and have $2.5 million left over to invest however we want. The courtroom erupted in murmurs of shock and disgust, but James Patterson wasn't finished. The next recording featured Brenda giving explicit instructions about how to manipulate both me and the grandchildren for maximum emotional damage. The key is making Marion look completely delusional while positioning ourselves as the responsible family members. Brenda's voice revealed with calculated cruelty. We coach the kids to question her memories. We get Mark to act like his mother is dangerous, and we make sure everyone in the agricultural community thinks she's lost her scientific credibility. But it was the third recording that shattered any remaining illusions about their humanity. In this conversation, captured just days before my forced institutionalization, Mark and Brenda discussed their long-term strategy with the casual indifference of people planning a business acquisition. The beautiful thing about this approach, Brenda explained with chilling efficiency, is that we get rid of Marion permanently and gain access to all the land development opportunities. Once we convert the farm to commercial use, we can subdivide the acreage and make millions more than we could ever earn from sustainable agriculture. Mark's voice joined the conversation, revealing his own eager participation in my destruction. I can't believe I'm saying this about my own mother, but you're right. She's always been too stubborn about those environmental principles. Maybe it's time she learned what real progress looks like. If the stress doesn't kill her, at least she'll be locked away where she can't interfere with our plans. The silence in the courtroom was deafening. Reporters scribbled frantically, cameras captured every emotion on the faces of the defendants, and I watched as the public finally heard the truth I had been trying to tell for over 2 years. The most devastating recording was saved for last. It captured Brenda's explicit instructions to Mark about how to handle my continued resistance to their plans. If the old lady keeps fighting us, Brenda's voice said with casual viciousness, we just need to make sure the stress becomes overwhelming. Cut off her support systems, increase the legal pressure, and let nature take its course. If she dies from the strain, our problems are solved permanently, and we can claim we did everything possible to help her. Mark's response was even more chilling. You're right. At her age, a heart attack or stroke would seem completely natural. We just need to make sure we look like grieving family members when it happens. When Mark was called to testify, he attempted to maintain his facade of wounded dignity and filial concern. But when confronted with his own recorded words, his carefully constructed persona began to disintegrate before the eyes of the world. Those recordings are taken out of context. He insisted, his voice rising with desperation. You're hearing private conversations where I was venting frustration about a very difficult family situation. Every family has moments of anger when dealing with elder care issues. But Dr. Carter was relentless. She played recording after recording, each one revealing Mark's increasing calculation and his willingness to destroy my life for financial gain. By the time she was finished, Mark was visibly shaking his lies exposed before the entire world. The final recording was the most devastating of all. It captured Mark and Brenda rehearsing their media strategy for the national television appearance that had branded me as mentally ill. Remember to look sad, but determined. Brenda's voice coached him in the recording. You need to come across as the responsible son who's finally speaking out to protect other families from going through what we've endured. The key is making people feel sorry for us while portraying your mother as the tragic villain of the story. When confronted with this evidence of his calculated performance, Mark suffered a complete psychological collapse on the witness stand. The confident, articulate man who had built a national platform on my destruction became a sobbing, incoherent figure, overwhelmed by the magnitude of his cruelty and the irreversible ruin of his reputation. I needed the money. He wept, his composure completely shattered. The debts were crushing me, and Brenda convinced me that Mom was never going to change her stubborn ways about the farm. I thought if we could just get her out of the picture, everyone would be better off. I never meant for it to go so far. I never meant to hurt her so badly. Brenda, sitting in the gallery, watched her husband's breakdown with growing horror. When her own recorded voice filled the courtroom discussing strategies for having me declared mentally incompetent, her own composure collapsed entirely. She attempted to flee the courtroom, but was apprehended by federal marshals as her role as the architect of the conspiracy became undeniable. Her courtroom arrest was captured by dozens of cameras, showing a woman who had once manipulated media coverage to destroy my reputation, now being led away in handcuffs, while her own recorded words provided evidence of her crimes. Mr. Jenkins, the lawyer, who had orchestrated much of the legal harassment against me, sat ashen-faced as the evidence mounted against him. His license to practice law would be revoked within hours, and criminal charges for conspiracy and professional misconduct would follow. As I watched the systematic destruction of the people who had nearly destroyed me, I felt no satisfaction, only profound sadness. These weren't strangers who had attacked me for money. They were my own son and his wife, people I had trusted with my life and my legacy. But it was the reaction of Lisa and David that provided the most complex and heartbreaking moment of the entire trial. My other children, who had remained silent during my persecution, but had not actively participated in the conspiracy, sat in the gallery, listening to the recordings with growing horror. As the full scope of Mark and Brenda's manipulation was revealed, Lisa began sobbing uncontrollably, burying her face in her hands as she realized how completely she'd been deceived. David sat beside her in stunned silence, his face pale with shock and shame. They looked at me across the courtroom with eyes full of remorse and desperate regret, but neither approached me. They understood that their passive complicity had contributed to my suffering, and they knew that the chasm created by their silence would take time and genuine effort to bridge. Judge Morrison looked at the defendants with undisguised disgust. In 30 years on the federal bench, she said, her voice carrying the weight of judicial authority, I have never witnessed such a calculated, comprehensive assault on an elderly family member's dignity, financial security, and physical well-being. The trial lasted 3 weeks, but the verdict was never in doubt. The evidence was overwhelming, the recordings irrefutable, and the conspiracy so thoroughly documented that the defendants had no realistic defense. As Dr. Carter returned to her seat, she looked at me with the respect and vindication I had been denied for so long. Mrs. Marion, she said quietly, your courage in fighting this battle has not only restored your own legacy, but has exposed patterns of elder abuse and environmental destruction that will help protect countless other families and lands from similar exploitation. The courtroom erupted in applause, but I sat quietly feeling the weight of 2 years of nightmare finally lifting from my shoulders. I had been vindicated, my integrity restored, my scientific legacy protected. But as I looked at my broken son sobbing on the witness stand, I realized that victory in court was only the beginning of a much longer healing process for our shattered family. The court's verdict was delivered with a gravity that reflected the unprecedented nature of the crimes committed against me and the land I had devoted my life to protecting. Federal Judge Morrison had heard enough evidence to understand that this case represented something far more serious than a simple family dispute. It was a sophisticated conspiracy that had nearly resulted in both my destruction and the permanent degradation of a sustainably managed agricultural ecosystem. Mark received a sentence of 10 years in federal prison for elder abuse, financial fraud, inheritance theft, and conspiracy. The judge noted that his actions represented a calculated betrayal of the most fundamental trust that must exist between parent and child, combined with a predatory exploitation of grief and environmental resources that strikes at the heart of what we mean when we speak of family stewardship. Brenda received 8 years for her role as the primary architect of the conspiracy and her systematic manipulation of media coverage to destroy my reputation. The judge observed that her actions represented a particularly sophisticated form of elder abuse that used modern communication technology to inflict psychological torture on a vulnerable family member. Mr. Jenkins faced disbarment and 6 years in prison for his role in orchestrating the legal harassment that had bankrupted me and legitimized the conspiracy through false professional authority. But the court's judgment went far beyond criminal convictions. Judge Morrison delivered a comprehensive statement that completely vindicated my character and dismantled the false narrative that had destroyed my life for 2 years. Mrs. Marion represents the highest standards of agricultural science and family integrity, she declared from the bench. The evidence presented in this case demonstrates beyond any doubt that she was the victim of a sophisticated campaign of psychological manipulation, financial fraud, and environmental exploitation. Her lifelong commitment to sustainable agriculture and her unwavering dedication to protecting family land stand in stark contrast to the greed and deception of those who attempted to destroy her. The financial restitution was substantial and comprehensive. The court ordered the return of the full $3 million value of my farm, plus damages for emotional distress, lost income legal fees, and the environmental remediation that would be required to restore the land to its previous condition. My home, my research facilities, and my scientific reputation were all restored through legal mandate. But more important than any financial settlement was the restoration of my relationship with Lisa and David and the beginning of a healing process that would transform our understanding of what family really means. The human cost of victory was staggering, but it also created opportunities for redemption that I had never thought possible. Mark, imprisoned and financially ruined, sent me letters from federal prison that revealed the complete collapse of his psychological defenses. His first letter arrived 3 months after his sentencing, written in handwriting that shook with the weight of his shame and regret. "Mom," he wrote, "I know you must hate me, and I understand why. I destroyed everything good in our family because I was too weak and too greedy to appreciate what you had given me. I convinced myself that your environmental principles were holding me back from success when actually they were trying to teach me what real success looks like." His letters continued to arrive regularly, chronicling his slow journey toward understanding the magnitude of his betrayal and his desperate desire to become worthy of eventual forgiveness. There was genuine remorse in these communications, a recognition of the damage he had caused that went far beyond our immediate family. "I see now that I didn't just steal from you," one letter read. "I stole from future generations who will inherit land that I damaged for short-term profit. I destroyed principles that took you 40 years to develop, and I turned my own children against the grandmother who could have taught them about real stewardship and integrity." I read each letter with complex emotions, profound sadness for the son I had lost, but also cautious hope for the man he might become if he continued this difficult work of genuine accountability. Brenda's fate was quite different. Her letters from prison were bitter, self-pitying, and filled with blame for everyone except herself. She had learned nothing from her consequences and continued to believe that she had been the victim of an unfair legal system rather than the architect of a cruel conspiracy. The most beautiful part of the aftermath was Lisa and David's journey toward redemption and reconciliation. They sought me out privately just days after the sentencing, appearing at the farmhouse with tears streaming down their faces and a humility I had never seen in them before. "Mom," Lisa said, her voice breaking with emotion, "I know that saying 'I'm sorry' is meaningless after what we allowed to happen to you. I know that our silence was a form of participation in your suffering, but I need you to know that I will spend the rest of my life trying to make amends for what we failed to do when you needed us most." David's remorse was equally profound and devastating. I convinced myself that staying neutral was the safe choice, he confessed. But I see now that neutrality in the face of cruelty is actually a form of cruelty itself. I abandoned you when you needed your children most, and I will carry that shame forever. Their commitment to making amends was immediate and comprehensive. Lisa moved back to the farm to help with the restoration work, dedicating herself to learning the sustainable agricultural practices she had once dismissed as outdated. David entered therapy to understand how his fear of conflict had enabled such devastating harm to someone he loved. Our conversations were deep and honest, covering not just the events of the past 2 years, but our entire relationship as a family. We discussed the difference between loyalty and enabling, between family harmony and family justice, between protecting peace and protecting truth. The grandchildren's healing was perhaps the most remarkable transformation of all. Ethan and Chloe, deeply traumatized by their father's public downfall and their own participation in my persecution, underwent intensive therapy to process the complex emotions of shame, confusion, and grief. When they finally came to see me 8 months after the trial ended, they were different young people than the ones who had publicly mocked my scientific work and dismissed my environmental principles. Grandma Ethan said, his voice filled with mature understanding that seemed far beyond his 18 years. we need to understand what really happened to our family. We need to know who you really are, not the person Dad and Brenda told us you were. Ethan and Chloe spent countless hours with me, learning about the scientific principles that had guided my work, understanding the environmental damage their father's practices had caused, and slowly rebuilding their connection to the land and the values that had once defined our family. I want to study environmental science, Chloe told me during one of our conversations. I want to understand how to fix the damage Dad caused, and I want to learn how to protect land the way you did. As I sat in my restored farmhouse one evening, reading Mark's latest letter from prison, while Lisa prepared dinner in the kitchen, and David reviewed plans for replanting the damaged fields, I realized that justice had come at an enormous cost, but had also brought unexpected gifts. My family was forever changed. Mark was broken by his own greed and manipulation, possibly beyond complete repair. But Lisa and David were working toward genuine redemption, and my grandchildren had been restored to me with a deeper understanding of what really mattered. The farm itself would require years of careful restoration to undo the environmental damage Mark's development practices had caused. But the land was resilient, and with patience and scientific expertise, it could be healed. The truth had liberated us all, though the price had been almost unbearably high. But we were no longer a family built on silence and avoidance. We were people who had learned to choose difficult honesty over comfortable lies. 3 years after the trial that changed everything, I stand in the same kitchen where my nightmare began, but everything around me has been transformed by truth healing and the patient work of restoration. The farmhouse that was once stripped bare by thieves now rings with the sounds of authentic family life and the gentle rhythms of people who have learned to value substance over surface. The farm itself has become something even more beautiful than it was before, a living testament to the power of sustainable agriculture and the resilience of land that is cared for with science and love. The fields that Mark's industrial practices had damaged are green, again producing crops that nourish both soil and community. The heritage seed varieties I thought were lost forever have been restored through connections with other conservation-minded farmers who had preserved genetics from my original collection. Lisa arrives every morning to work alongside me, her transformation from skeptical daughter to passionate advocate for sustainable agriculture complete and inspiring. She has become not just my partner in farming, but my closest friend and confidant, our relationship now built on honesty, rather than the polite distance that had characterized our interactions for years. "You know what I love most about this work, Mom," she said last week as we examined the soil structure in our restored East Field. "It's not just about growing crops, it's about healing the earth and proving that doing the right thing always produces the best results, even when it takes patience to see them." Our relationship has deepened beyond anything I could have imagined during those early years of motherhood. We talk about everything: her dreams for expanding our conservation programs, her feelings about family forgiveness and accountability, her complex emotions about justice and redemption. She has become a remarkable woman whose capacity for learning and growth was forged in the crucible of our shared trauma. The grandchildren visit every weekend, transformed young adults who understand the difference between authentic values and superficial success. Ethan, now 21, and majoring in environmental science, often brings his girlfriend to learn about heritage seed preservation and soil restoration techniques. Chloe, 19, and passionate about agricultural policy, volunteers at the conservation center we established to help other farmers transition to sustainable practices. "Grandma, you didn't just save our farm," Chloe told me recently as we worked together in the greenhouse. You saved our family's soul. We were becoming people who valued money over principles, and you showed us what it means to fight for what really matters. David visits monthly our relationship, cautious but honest, and slowly growing stronger. His therapy has taught him to face uncomfortable truths about his own character, and his letters have become thoughtful explorations of accountability, family loyalty, and the difference between keeping peace and enabling harm. I understand now that my silence wasn't neutrality, it was cowardice, he wrote in his most recent letter. I told myself I was avoiding conflict, but I was actually abandoning you when you needed me most. Learning to live with that truth has been the hardest thing I've ever done, but also the most necessary. Mark's transformation has been slower, but no less genuine. His letters from federal prison have evolved from desperate apologies to thoughtful reflections on environmental stewardship, family responsibility, and the long work of earning redemption through changed behavior rather than just changed words. Mom, his most recent letter read, I'm participating in a prison agricultural program where we grow food for local food banks. Working with soil again has reminded me of everything you tried to teach me about patience, sustainability, and thinking beyond immediate profit. I may never be able to undo the damage I caused, but I can spend the rest of my life making sure other families don't go through what ours did. Our relationship remains distant and careful, but it's built on truth rather than the avoidance and enabling that had characterized our interactions for years. When he's released in 5 years, we'll have the foundation for something authentic, even if it's different from what we once had. The memoir I published 18 months ago, Rooted in Truth, A Farmer's Fight for Family and Land, has become essential reading for agricultural policymakers and elder advocates. The book's success has allowed me to establish a foundation that provides legal assistance and environmental expertise to families dealing with similar inheritance fraud and land exploitation. The speaking engagements take me around the country, sharing our story with audiences of farmers, families, and professionals who understand that agricultural land can be weaponized by people who prioritize immediate profit over long-term stewardship. Each presentation is an opportunity to prevent other families from experiencing the devastation we endured. But the most meaningful work happens right here on the farm that nearly died but was restored through patience, science, and love. We host workshops for sustainable agriculture, provide internships for young farmers, and serve as a demonstration site for environmental restoration techniques. Brenda remains in federal prison, her appeals exhausted and her health deteriorating under the weight of her own bitterness and isolation. Her final letter received a year ago was barely coherent, a rambling attempt to justify her actions that revealed the complete collapse of her ability to accept responsibility for the harm she had caused. I feel no satisfaction in her suffering, only sadness for the waste of a life that could have been spent building rather than destroying. She serves as a reminder that the choice to love or to manipulate is one we make every day, and the consequences of choosing cruelty extend far beyond the immediate victims. As I prepare for bed each evening in the farmhouse where Arthur and I raised our children, I feel a peace that I never thought possible during those dark months of institutional imprisonment and false accusations. The woman who once slept on a cot in a homeless shelter, branded as mentally incompetent by her own children, now rests in her own comfortable bed, surrounded by evidence of authentic relationships and purposeful work. My scientific legacy has been not just restored, but enhanced. The agricultural principles I defended throughout my career have been vindicated, and my fight against my own family's environmental crimes has become a landmark case in agricultural law and elder protection. The phone rings, interrupting my evening reflections. It's Lisa calling from her house down the road to share news about a successful grant application for our Heritage Seed Preservation Program. Her voice is bright with excitement and love, and I'm reminded once again that the greatest victories are often the most personal ones. As I turn off the lights and head upstairs, I pass the framed photograph of Arthur and me that holds the place of honor in my living room. We're standing in our fields during harvest season, our faces radiant with the joy of people who understand that real wealth comes from caring for something larger than yourself. "We did it, Arthur," I whisper to his image. "We protected what mattered most. Justice was served, truth was vindicated, and authentic love was rediscovered. The price was enormous, but the victory was complete." 5 years have passed since Mark's devastating revelation of the forged will changed my life forever. And as I sit in my sunlit kitchen this morning, watching Lisa teach Chloe advanced soil analysis techniques, while Ethan reviews graduate school applications for agricultural science programs, I'm struck by how completely my world has been transformed. The woman who once faced false accusations of mental incompetence in a cold facility where she was treated as a burden now lives in radiant peace on the land she fought to protect. My days are filled with the gentle rhythms of authentic family relationships, meaningful work as an advocate for agricultural preservation, and the quiet satisfaction of a life lived according to unshakable principles of environmental stewardship and family integrity. The farm around me tells the story of recovery and renewal. My research greenhouses stand where they belong. My scientific journals line the shelves with the dignity they deserve, and family photographs chronicle not just our history, but the journey from betrayal to redemption that has defined these past years. Lisa's laughter fills the kitchen as she shares stories about our latest conservation project, her voice carrying the confidence and moral clarity of a woman who learned to choose environmental responsibility over financial convenience. Chloe's voice joins hers as she describes her plans to study agricultural policy, the words of a young woman who understands that protecting the land requires both scientific knowledge and political courage. Mark's weekly phone calls have become treasured connections, built on his growing understanding of accountability and his commitment to becoming the environmental steward he should have been all along. Our relationship remains careful and honest, built on hope rather than assumption, but it grows stronger with each conversation rooted in truth rather than avoidance. The greatest lesson of my ordeal has been this: integrity cannot be stolen by others, only surrendered by ourselves. For months, I allowed my children's accusations and society's false judgments to make me question my own competence and sanity. I nearly lost myself in the maze of their lies and manipulation. But authentic principles have a power that transcends human manipulation, and sustainable practices provide a foundation that cannot be shaken by external storms. I've learned that real family is not defined by blood relationships or legal documents, but by shared values and genuine commitment to each other's well-being and the well-being of the land we're privileged to steward. Dr. Carter, Dr. Chen and the other members of my legal team have become my chosen family, bound together by our commitment to protecting both elders and the environment. The Heritage Seed Network and my former scientific colleagues have shown me that relationships built on shared principles and mutual respect can become sources of life-saving support when biological family fails. Most importantly, I've discovered that a life of purpose is always possible, regardless of age or circumstances. My work as an advocate for elder property rights and environmental protection has given new meaning to my expertise as an agricultural scientist. The memoir that grew from my pain has become a beacon of hope for other families facing similar exploitation. The foundation I established ensures that my suffering will prevent similar anguish for countless others. To anyone facing similar battles, to the elderly who doubt their own worth when children turn against them for inheritance, to the environmental stewards whose principles are dismissed as outdated by those who prioritize profit over sustainability, I offer this promise: truth will ultimately prevail. Integrity can be reclaimed even after profound betrayal, and a life of authentic connection and purposeful service is always possible. The spirit of resilience and an unwavering commitment to environmental stewardship can triumph over even the most ruthless greed. Land may be exploited, but it can be healed. Family bonds may be tested, but they cannot be permanently destroyed when they're built on genuine care rather than control. And sometimes the most devastating betrayals become the foundation for the most beautiful redemptions. I am Marian, and at 72 years old, I am finally completely radiantly free, rooted in truth, flourishing in peace, and growing stronger every day. When children steal a mother's legacy, a farmer's fight for truth,